"Your mother was never buried," the girl said, pointing at the casket. "But when they open it, they discover something terrible." Comment what you thought of this story, giving it a score from 0 to 10, and tell me what city you're watching from. I really want to know if you like my story and get to know you better, so subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The respectful silence of the wake was shattered by a sound no one expected to hear. A sharp, desperate cry echoed through the hall of the Harmony Creek funeral home, making every head turn toward the main entrance. A small, grubby girl, looking no older than 4, burst through the door, her green eyes shining with a disturbing intensity for someone so young. She screamed that the casket was empty, pointing directly at the coffin where the body of Eleanor Vance lay. She insisted that the old woman had never been buried, that she wasn't in there. Arthur Vance, 52, felt his blood run cold. For 3 decades, he had built his reputation as the largest agricultural supplier in Harmony Creek, Georgia. And now, an unknown child was disrupting the most solemn moment of his life. His mother, Eleanor, had passed away 3 days ago at the age of 82, after a bout of pneumonia consumed her quickly. His sister-in-law, Beatrice, a respected lawyer in town, whispered, asking who the girl was. Her brown eyes showed more irritation than concern, as if the child's presence were a personal inconvenience. She demanded to know how the girl had gotten in and where her guardians were. The little girl, Lily, a name she shouted when asked, wore torn, dirt-stained clothes. Her brown hair was tangled, and a dark smudge that looked like ash marked her face. But it was her expression that disturbed Arthur the most. It wasn't the face of a confused or frightened child. It was determined, almost adult-like in its conviction. Lily insisted that she knew Mrs. Eleanor, walking directly to the casket as the attendees stepped back in horror. She said Eleanor had told her she didn't want to stay there, that she still had things to do. Dr. Evan Caldwell, the family doctor for over 20 years, approached the girl with his hands outstretched reassuringly. His 63 years of experience dealing with delicate situations had taught him to remain calm, but his voice trembled slightly. He told the child she must be mistaken, that Mrs. Eleanor had been very ill. Lily interrupted, her small voice firm, stating that Eleanor wasn't sick when she saw her. She said Eleanor was planting flowers in the garden and gave her something. The little girl opened her small, dirty hand, revealing a delicate silver brooch in the shape of a bird. The object glittered under the soft lights of the funeral home, and Arthur felt the world spin around him. He knew that brooch. Eleanor had always said she'd lost it years ago. A piece that had belonged to her own mother, Arthur asked in a hoarse voice where she got it. For the first time in 3 days, since receiving the news of Eleanor's deteriorating health, he felt something other than the numbness of loss. Lily replied that Eleanor gave it to her because she said she would need it to prove something important. She also told her about the secret Eleanor had kept for a long, long time. Doris Santos, the Vance family's housekeeper for 15 years, who had been watching in silence, let out a muffled gasp. Her trembling hands clutched the rosary she always carried, her pale face showing a nervousness Arthur had never seen before. Beatrice stepped forward and asked what secret, her experienced lawyer's tone attempting to mask a growing unease. She told the girl she shouldn't be there and threatened to call Child Protective Services. Lily shouted no, running to hide behind Arthur's legs. She cried out that she had run away from the shelter because Mrs. Eleanor said Beatrice would try to send her away, that Beatrice didn't like it when people knew the truth. The hall fell into absolute silence. The 40 or so guests, friends, business acquaintances, neighbors, watched the scene with a mixture of embarrassment and morbid curiosity. Arthur could feel the weight of their gazes on him, questioning his ability to control the situation. He called out to his longtime accountant and friend, Theodore, asking him to take the guests to the adjacent room. He needed to speak with the girl in private. Theo Albright, a slender man of 58 who had known Arthur since they were teenagers, nodded gravely. Something in his eyes suggested he too was disturbed by the child's words, but he respected his friend's request. When the room was emptier, with only the close family and Doris remaining, Arthur knelt in front of Lily. His immaculate black suit contrasted sharply with the girl's dirty clothes. He asked gently if her name was Lily, and if she could tell him where she met his mother and how she got the brooch. She replied that she met her at St. Vincent's shelter, her green eyes fixed on his. She explained that Mrs. Eleanor came every week, bringing tasty food and sitting with her in the garden. She said that Lily reminded her of someone very important. Arthur exchanged a confused look with Beatrice. St. Vincent's shelter was on the other side of town, a place the family had never visited. Why would Eleanor do volunteer work without telling anyone? Doris murmured that it was impossible, but her voice lacked conviction. She said Mrs. Eleanor had barely left the house in recent weeks. Lily insisted that she did leave every Thursday, and the last time, a week before she got sick, she gave her the brooch and told her about the daughter she had to give away a long time ago. The girl's words fell like a bomb in the already tense atmosphere. Arthur felt his heart race violently. Eleanor had never mentioned having other children besides him. She had always said he was her only blessing, her beloved only son. Beatrice's voice was sharp with tension as she asked what daughter. Lily said it was the daughter who lived far away and whom she never got to see grow up, as if reciting something she had carefully memorized. She added that Mrs. Eleanor cried every time she spoke of her and said that when the time came, someone would need to take care of her because she was the only family left. At that moment, Dr. Caldwell approached again, discreetly checking his watch. He told Arthur they needed to proceed with the schedule, that the cremation ceremony was set for 3 o'clock. Arthur, surprised, asked about the cremation, stating that his mother had always wanted to be buried next to his father. An awkward silence filled the room. Beatrice avoided her brother-in-law's gaze, while Dr. Caldwell cleared his throat nervously. The doctor said those were the instructions she had left in writing, very specific instructions on how to proceed after her passing. Arthur demanded to see the documents and wanted to know why no one had informed him about these supposed visits to the shelter. Lily tugged at his jacket sleeve, getting his attention. She told Mr. Arthur that Mrs. Eleanor had said that if she ever came here and told him these things, he would be very angry at first. But then he would understand that she just wanted to do what was right. He asked what else, she said, feeling a growing tightness in his chest. She said that he was a good man, but he had worked so hard that he forgot how to truly love people, and that she hoped Lily would help him remember. The child's words struck Arthur like a slap in the face. In recent years, he had indeed distanced himself from Eleanor, always citing urgent business commitments, important contracts, meetings that couldn't be postponed. How many times had she called asking for a visit, and he had promised to go next week? Beatrice said it was ridiculous, but her voice sounded forced. She claimed a 4-year-old couldn't remember such complex conversations. Lily replied with dignity that she remembered everything Mrs. Eleanor told her, and she had asked her to tell Mr. Arthur something very important when the time was right. He asked, almost in a whisper, what it was. Lily looked directly into his eyes, and for a moment Arthur had the unsettling impression of seeing his own mother's gaze reflected in the child's face. She said that the truth about the family had been buried for 40 years. But now it was time to unearth it, and that it would all begin when people discovered what really happened to her ashes. Lily's words echoed through the hall like a dark omen. Arthur felt the floor move beneath his feet as he processed what the girl had just said. 40 years, ashes, buried truths. Each word seemed to carry a weight he couldn't fully comprehend. He turned to his sister-in-law with an expression she didn't recognize and said he needed to see those documents now, all of them. Beatrice protested that he was grieving and it wasn't the time, but he cut her off with a sharp, "Now, Beatrice." His voice sliced through the air with an authority that made even Doris flinch. He demanded she explain why she'd been so quick to arrange the cremation. Beatrice opened her mouth to protest, but was interrupted by Theo, who returned to the hall with a worried look on his thin face. He told Arthur he needed to speak with him urgently. Arthur said not now, that he was trying to understand, but Theo insisted it was about his mother's finances, adding there were bank transactions he needed to know about. Theo cast a meaningful glance at Lily, clearly hesitant to speak in front of the child. Arthur took Lily by her small, dirty hand and said to come with him, that she was going to tell him everything she knew about his mother. They went to a small, private room at the back of the funeral home, where families usually discussed the final service details. Theo closed the door behind them, and Beatrice followed, clearly displeased. Arthur knelt again before the girl and asked if she could tell him exactly what his mother had said about a daughter. Lily replied, clutching the brooch as if it were a talisman, that she said when she was young, before marrying his father, she had a baby she couldn't keep. Her family forced her to give the baby to other people to raise because she wasn't married yet. Arthur's blood ran cold. Eleanor had become pregnant before marriage. In the 1960s, in a conservative town like Harmony Creek, that would have been a devastating scandal for any respectable family. Theo sat next to Arthur with his financial documents spread on the table and asked if she had said the daughter's name. Lily answered without hesitation that it was Catherine Ayres, and that Mrs. Eleanor always cried when she talked about her, saying she sent her money every month but could never visit her. Theo paled and began to flip through his papers urgently. He told Arthur that it explained the monthly transfers he had found. For 40 years, his mother had sent considerable sums to an account in Savannah, Georgia. The beneficiary was Catherine Ayres, Arthur completed, feeling as if he were falling into a bottomless pit. Theo confirmed it, adding that the transfers had stopped abruptly a week ago, the same day his mother was hospitalized. Beatrice had remained silent until that moment, but now she approached the table with rigid movements. She said it didn't change anything, that even if Eleanor had a daughter before marriage, it didn't affect the current will or the funeral arrangements. Arthur asked her directly, his eyes fixed on hers, why she was in such a hurry to cremate his mother and why he hadn't known about these written instructions until today. Beatrice replied that Eleanor had asked her to be discreet, but her voice didn't sound convincing. She claimed Eleanor had come to her 2 weeks before getting sick and said she wanted everything settled quickly when the time came. Lily suddenly exclaimed it was a lie, making everyone turn to her. She said Mrs. Eleanor had told her they would try to burn her quickly so no one would find out the truth, and that it couldn't happen. Beatrice said coldly that a 4-year-old doesn't understand these things, but there was sweat on her forehead. She insisted the girl was confusing conversations, mixing up fantasies. Lily shouted that she wasn't stupid, tears welling up in her green eyes. She said Mrs. Eleanor taught her to remember everything correctly and had warned her that bad people would try to say she was lying. Arthur felt a rage build in his chest, an emotion he hadn't experienced with such intensity in years. He asked Doris if she knew about his mother's visits to the shelter. The housekeeper, who had been leaning against the wall, began to tremble visibly. She admitted that Mrs. Eleanor had asked her not to tell. When asked why, she said Eleanor claimed he was too busy with business and wouldn't understand. Doris wiped her eyes with her apron, adding that in the last few weeks, Mrs. Eleanor had been very agitated, talking to herself, writing letters she later burned, and sneaking out when she thought Doris wasn't looking. He asked who the letters were for, but she didn't know, only that she cried a lot while writing them. Theo cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the tension. He told Arthur there was something else he needed to know, that his mother had changed her will 3 weeks ago. The ensuing silence was absolute. Beatrice stood rigid as a statue. While Arthur felt the world spin around him again, he asked how it was changed. Theo explained that she had allocated a significant portion of the inheritance to St. Vincent's shelter, an amount that, in his estimation, would be enough to completely renovate the facilities and sustain its operation for several years. Beatrice murmured that it was impossible, but her voice sounded more desperate than indignant. She claimed Eleanor lacked the mental capacity to make such decisions, that she was senile and confused. Dr. Caldwell, who had entered the room silently, interrupted, stating that, on the contrary, Eleanor was in full mental capacity when she asked him to attest to her sanity for the will change. In fact, she had specifically asked him to confirm her lucidity in writing. Arthur stood up slowly, feeling the weight of decades of family neglect fall upon his shoulders. He asked if she knew she was going to die. Dr. Caldwell replied not necessarily, but that she had said she had pending matters to resolve and wanted to ensure certain people were cared for after she was gone. He glanced discreetly at Lily, adding it was people who were important to her, even if the family didn't know. Arthur suddenly said he wanted to go to the shelter, to see where his mother spent her time and talk to the people who knew her there. Beatrice protested that it wasn't the time, that they had a schedule to keep and commitments to honor. Arthur declared that the schedule could wait and took Lily's hand, saying they were leaving. As they left, Lily told Mr. Arthur that Mrs. Eleanor had asked her to take him to a special place at the shelter, where he would understand why she did what she did. As they exited the funeral home, Arthur heard Beatrice talking in a low voice to Dr. Caldwell about sticking to deadlines and avoiding unnecessary complications. But his mind was focused on Lily's words and the growing certainty that his mother had orchestrated all of this with a specific purpose. Driving his black Mercedes through the familiar streets of Harmony Creek on the way to the shelter, Arthur couldn't stop thinking about Beatrice's expression when Theo mentioned the change in the will. It was more than surprise or disappointment. It was panic. And people don't panic over will changes unless they have something to hide. Lily spoke from the back seat, telling Mr. Arthur that Mrs. Eleanor said he would be very sad when he found out the truth, but then he'd be happy because he would finally have a real family. He asked what she meant by that. She replied that he wasn't truly happy being alone and that Eleanor had kept a secret for a long time to protect everyone. But now it was time for people to know the truth. Arthur parked in front of St. Vincent's shelter, an old, poorly maintained building he had passed hundreds of times without ever really noticing. Lily got out of the car and ran toward the gate as if she were coming home. She pointed to a flower bed in the back of the property and said that was where Mrs. Eleanor sat with her and where she buried the important things nobody else could know about. As they walked toward the flower bed, Arthur felt he was about to discover something that would change not only his understanding of his mother, but his entire family history. And for some reason, he couldn't explain. He also knew Beatrice would do anything to stop that discovery from happening. St. Vincent's shelter was even more dilapidated than Arthur had imagined. The peeling walls and leaking roof told a story of decades of neglect. Children of various ages played in the dirt yard, their mended clothes a painful contrast to the expensive suit he wore. An 8-year-old girl shouted Lily's name, running to meet them, asking where she had been and that Miss Martha had been looking for her for days. Lily greeted her friend Lucy, but said she had to show Mr. Arthur something important first. Martha Olson, the shelter's director, appeared at the main door. She was a woman in her early 40s, with premature grey hair and hands calloused from hard work. When she saw Arthur, her expression shifted from relief to surprise. She asked Mr. Vance what he was doing there, approaching and wiping her hands on her faded apron. She then asked about Lily, saying she had disappeared 3 days ago and they had been frantic. Arthur explained that she had shown up at his mother's wake and said she knew Eleanor. Martha's eyes filled with tears instantly. She asked how Mrs. Eleanor was, that she hadn't come that week, and they were worried because she never missed a Thursday. The reality hit Arthur like a punch to the gut. His mother had died on a Wednesday. The last Thursday she could have visited the shelter was just 2 days before she fell ill. He said, his voice thick with emotion, that she had passed away 3 days ago. Martha covered her mouth with her hands, sobbing openly. Several children gathered around, sensing the commotion, and Lily had to explain the situation to them in her simple, direct way. She told them that Mrs. Eleanor had gone to heaven, but she had left Mr. Arthur here to take care of them. Arthur started to say he hadn't said that, but the girl interrupted him, saying Mrs. Eleanor said he would understand when he saw what she had planted. Lily pulled his hand toward the back of the property, telling him to come with her. Martha followed, wiping her tears with the hem of her apron. She explained that Mrs. Eleanor was like a grandmother to all the children there, bringing food, medicine, clothes, but mostly affection, and that Lily was special to her. Arthur asked why, watching as Lily walked with a sense of ownership, clearly knowing every corner of the place. Martha said she wasn't sure, but whenever she looked at Lily, Mrs. Eleanor would get sad eyes and murmur things about lost chances and past mistakes. They reached the flower bed Lily had mentioned. It was a carefully maintained space with colorful flowers planted in organized rows. Completely different from the rest of the neglected shelter, in the center was a small wooden bench, weathered by time. Lily pointed to a specific area near some yellow roses and said Mrs. Eleanor told her that when the time was right, she should show him what she had hidden there. Arthur asked what was hidden, kneeling on the dirt ground. Lily said it was a little box with important things and started digging with her small hands, and Arthur helped her. She explained that Eleanor said it was proof that she had always tried to do the right thing, even when it hurt a lot. After a few minutes of careful digging, Arthur's fingers touched something solid. It was a small metal box, the kind used for cookies, protected by several layers of plastic. With trembling hands he opened it. Inside were yellowed photographs, old bank receipts, and several letters tied with a blue ribbon. The first photo showed a young Eleanor, looking no older than 17, holding a baby. On the back, in his mother's familiar handwriting, was written, "Catherine, my lost love, 1964. Arthur murmured, "My God," his hands shaking as he examined the other photos. There was a sequence showing the growth of a girl who looked remarkably like Eleanor. First communion, birthdays, high school graduation. Martha, looking over his shoulder, explained that she had followed Catherine's entire life through photos someone sent her. Mrs. Eleanor had shown her a few times, always crying when talking about the daughter she was forced to give up for adoption. Arthur picked up the bank receipts. They were proof of monthly transfers dating from 1965 until a week ago. The amounts started small but increased over the years as his financial prosperity grew. He murmured that she had supported a daughter she couldn't see for 40 years. Feeling the weight of the loneliness his mother must have carried her whole life, Lily pointed to the ribbon-tied bundle and asked about the letters. Arthur carefully opened the first one. The paper was yellowed and the ink faded, but still legible. It read, "My dearest Catherine, today you turned 15 and I can't be there to celebrate with you. But know that I think of you every day and that the money I send comes with all my mother's love. One day, when people understand that love doesn't need marriage to exist, perhaps we can truly meet. Your mother who never forgot, Eleanor." Tears burned Arthur's eyes as he continued to read. Letter after letter, his mother poured out her heart to a daughter she had been forced to abandon, telling her about her life, about the arranged marriage to his father, about Arthur's birth, about the constant guilt of having a complete family, while Catherine grew up without her. Martha spoke softly, saying there was something else he needed to know. Mrs. Eleanor had told her that Catherine had an accident a few months ago and didn't survive. The world stopped spinning. He asked how. She explained it was a car accident in Savannah and that Mrs. Eleanor was devastated when she found out, which was why she started coming to the shelter more often. She said she needed to care for orphan children because she hadn't been able to care for her own daughter. Arthur looked at Lily, who was watching everything in silence with her piercing green eyes. Suddenly, something clicked in his mind like a puzzle piece. He said slowly that Lily had mentioned Mrs. Eleanor talking about her being the only family left, and asked what she meant. The girl looked at Martha, as if asking for permission to speak. The director nodded gravely. Lily said simply that Catherine was her mother, that Mrs. Eleanor was her grandmother, and that she had told her everything in the last few weeks when she found out Lily was at the shelter. The ensuing silence was deafening. Arthur felt as if he were falling into an endless abyss. Lily wasn't just a lost child who knew his mother. She was his niece. The granddaughter Eleanor had never officially known until the last months of her life. He asked, his voice barely a whisper, why she hadn't told him this before. She replied that Mrs. Eleanor said he first needed to understand how she had suffered all these years, and how she had tried to do what was right, even while being forced to lie. Lily approached him, holding the bird brooch again. She said Eleanor told her he would only truly accept her if he knew the whole story. Arthur felt the weight of decades of family neglect crashing down on him like an avalanche. While he was building his business empire, his mother was carrying the pain of a forced separation alone. And when she finally had the chance to meet her granddaughter, she was dying. Lily said there was one more thing and pulled a sealed envelope from her dirty pocket with his name written in Eleanor's handwriting. She told him to deliver this only after he discovered the truth. With trembling fingers, Arthur opened the envelope. The letter was dated a week before Eleanor's hospitalization. It read, "My dear son, if you are reading this, it means Lily has managed to show you who we really are as a family. Forgive me for keeping this secret for so long, but at the time, society would not forgive an unmarried mother, and your grandparents forced me to choose between the family's honor and a mother's love. I chose to protect our reputation, and I paid the price every day of my life. Catherine died without forgiving me for abandoning her, but Lily can still have a family if you can find it in your heart to love a child who carries the Vance blood in her veins. She is all that remains of the love I was forbidden to show. Take care of each other. You are all that matters now." When Arthur finished reading, he realized Lily was crying silently beside him. He pulled her into a hug, finally understanding the magnitude of his mother's plan. Eleanor had orchestrated everything, the meeting at the wake, the clues, the buried box, to ensure he discovered the truth, and took on the responsibility she had never been able to exercise. But as he held his niece in his arms, a bitter doubt grew in his mind. If Eleanor had planned everything so carefully, why was Beatrice in such a hurry to cremate the body? What was his sister-in-law trying to hide? Arthur's phone rang insistently while he was still at the shelter, holding Lily. It was Theo, and his voice sounded more tense than he had ever heard. He asked Arthur where he was, that Beatrice was trying to speed up the cremation. She had obtained a judge's order, claiming Arthur had suffered a nervous breakdown and was unfit to make decisions. Arthur felt his anger rise again, asking what nervous breakdown, that he was perfectly fine. He questioned how she got a court order so quickly. Theo didn't know, but said Dr. Caldwell had signed a document attesting that Arthur was in an altered emotional state after the incident with the child at the wake. Arthur looked at Lily, who was watching his phone conversation with concern. He told Theo to meet him at his house in an hour and to bring all of his mother's financial documents, including the transfers to Catherine Ayres. Theo added that there was more, that Beatrice was questioning the validity of the will change, alleging Eleanor was senile when she made it. Arthur exclaimed that his mother was not senile, that she had planned all of this in precise detail and told Theo he'd see him in an hour at his house. When he hung up, Martha approached with a worried expression. She said there was something about Lily he needed to know, that she hadn't arrived there in the usual way. He asked what she meant. She explained that Lily was found wandering the streets 6 months ago, completely alone. She wouldn't say anything about her family, just kept repeating the name Catherine and crying when asked about her parents. Arthur knelt beside Lily and asked his dear niece if she could tell him what happened to her mother. The girl's green eyes filled with tears. She said her mommy and she were going to visit Grandma Eleanor, that she had found out where she lived and wanted to apologize for being angry for so long. He asked if they were going to visit, and she said yes, that her mommy had rented a car and said she was finally going to confront the past. But on the way, Lily sobbed, and Martha hugged her protectively. She said there was a crash, her mommy got hurt and had to go to the hospital. She ran and hid because she was afraid of the doctors. Arthur asked what happened to her mother at the hospital, though deep down he already knew the answer. Lily whispered that she never woke up. She had waited and waited, but she never came to get her. So she started looking for Grandma Eleanor on her own. The tragedy of the situation hit Arthur like a devastating wave. Eleanor had lost her daughter just as Catherine was coming to reconcile with her, and Lily had lost her mother just when she was finally going to meet her grandmother. He asked how she found his mother. She said she asked many people where Mrs. Eleanor Vance lived, and it took a long time, but she managed to get to her house. Lily wiped her nose on her dirty sleeve, but the lady who took care of the house wouldn't let her in. When he asked if it was Doris, she confirmed it. She said Doris told her the grandma was sick and couldn't have visitors, but she saw her grandma in the window and she saw her too. She cried a lot and waved to her. Arthur felt his heart break. Eleanor had seen her granddaughter at the window and couldn't hug her because of the protections Doris had imposed. He asked how they met then. Lily said she kept coming back every day, and one day her grandma managed to sneak out and found her in the little park near the house. That's when she told her everything about the family and started bringing her to the shelter. He asked why she didn't take her to her house. Martha interrupted, explaining that Mrs. Eleanor had told her that if she took Lily home, the family would find out the truth before she could prepare everything properly. She was afraid the black sheep of the family would try to harm the girl. Arthur asked about the black sheep. Martha said she referred to someone as the one who was always jealous and now has legal power, never saying the name, but speaking with great resentment. Arthur needed no more clues. Beatrice had always shown jealousy of Eleanor's position in the family, and as a lawyer, she had the knowledge and influence to manipulate legal situations. He took Lily's small hands and asked if she had other relatives, anyone from her mother's family. She said no, that her mommy always said it was just the two of them, that her family had rejected her when she was born. Another piece of the puzzle fit. Catherine had become pregnant while unmarried, just like Eleanor 40 years earlier, history repeating itself, with the difference that this time, the mother had chosen to keep her daughter and face social judgment alone. Martha hesitated, then said she needed to tell him something. On Mrs. Eleanor's last visit, she had left something for him. She handed him a small envelope with his name on it. Inside was an old key and a piece of paper with an address in Savannah. On the back, Eleanor had written, "Catherine's house. Everything that's left of her is there. Lily has the right to know her mother's memories." He asked Lily if she wanted to go there with him. She nodded vigorously, but Martha seemed concerned, noting that technically Lily was still in the custody of the state, and taking her without authorization could be a problem. Arthur stated firmly that she was his niece, his family, and he would sort out the legal part later. As they headed to the car, Arthur's phone rang again. This time it was a number he didn't recognize. He answered, and a man introduced himself as Judge Carmichael, saying he had received an urgent request from Ms. Beatrice regarding his mental capacity and needed to speak with him that day. Arthur replied that his mental capacity was perfect, in fact, clearer than it had been in years. The judge still insisted on a formal evaluation and scheduled it for 5 o'clock in his office. Arthur agreed. When he hung up, Lily was looking at him with concern, asking if Aunt Beatrice was going to try to separate them. The word uncle hit Arthur like a ray of sunshine amidst the storm of revelations. It was the first time anyone had called him that, and it represented a real family connection he had never experienced. He promised it wouldn't happen, but first they needed to find out why she was in such a hurry to cremate her grandmother. The trip to Savannah took 2 hours. Catherine's house was in a simple neighborhood, a modest but well-kept building. When Arthur opened the door with the key Eleanor had left, he found a space that told the story of a woman who had fought alone to raise her daughter. There were photos of baby Lily scattered around the living room, children's drawings taped to the refrigerator, and toys organized in baskets. But what caught his attention most was a desk in Catherine's room, covered with unsent letters addressed to Mother. Lily explained that her mommy wrote to her grandma but never sent the letters, saying one day she would have the courage, but always crying and putting them in the drawer. Arthur read some of Catherine's letters. They were painful accounts from a daughter who grew up without a mother, questioning why she had been abandoned, but also expressing a conflicting love and a desire for forgiveness. In one of the last letters, dated just 2 months ago, Catherine wrote, "Mother, I found out where you live. I know you always sent money, and that confuses me even more. Why did you give me away if you loved me? Why did you never come for me?" Lily is asking about her family, and I don't know what to answer anymore. Maybe it's time we talked in person, even if it's painful for both of us. It was clear that Catherine had finally gathered the courage to seek out Eleanor, but fate had prevented their reconciliation. On the nightstand, Arthur found Catherine's documents, including her will. To his surprise, she had left everything to Eleanor, the mother I never truly knew, but who I know loved me from a distance. He showed the document to Lily, explaining that her mother had left the house to her grandmother, and now that her grandmother had passed, it technically all passed to the family. Lily asked if that meant it was hers, and he replied that it meant she had rights that needed to be protected. Arthur looked around the simple but cozy house and said it also meant someone might be interested in preventing her from receiving her inheritance. As they drove back to Harmony Creek, Arthur began to form a disturbing theory. If Beatrice knew about Catherine and Lily's existence, she would have financial motives to rush Eleanor's cremation and question her sanity. With Eleanor dead and cremated quickly, it would be harder to contest any changes to the will. And if Lily disappeared into the child protective system, there would be no one to claim her rights. As they reached the town, Lily told him her grandma had told her something important before she got sick. She said that if anything happened to her, she should tell him about the secret safe, located in her grandma's house behind the painting of the Virgin Mary in her bedroom. She said it contained proof that someone had been trying to steal money from the family for a long time. As they headed to Eleanor's house, Arthur knew he was about to discover the real reason behind Beatrice's haste, and he suspected that when he opened that safe, it wouldn't just be his family's history that would change forever. Eleanor's house was immersed in a disturbing quietness when Arthur and Lily arrived. Doris had left, leaving a note saying she would be back the next day to organize the final details. The housekeeper's absence created a ghostly atmosphere in the place where Eleanor had lived her final days. Lily guided Arthur through the house with a familiarity he found strange, saying her grandma was in the bedroom upstairs and had brought her there secretly a few times when the lady went out shopping. They climbed the creaky stairs to the master bedroom. The room was exactly as Eleanor had left it, with her clothes still in the closet and her perfume lingering in the air. Arthur felt a pang of guilt as he realized how many details of his mother's life he had missed by always being focused on business. Lily pointed to an old painting of the Virgin Mary hanging on the wall next to the bed and said her grandma had shown her how it worked. The girl approached the painting and discreetly pressed the left side of the frame. To Arthur's surprise, the painting swung open like a small door, revealing a niche carved into the wall where a small but sturdy safe was located. He asked how she knew that, impressed by his mother's ingenuity. Lily recited, as if memorized, that her grandma said every family needs to have well-kept secrets, but when the right time came, the secrets needed to become truths. She added that she had taught her the combination too. With small but precise fingers, Lily turned the safe's dial. 270464. Catherine's date of birth. When the safe opened with a soft click, Arthur felt he was about to discover something that would change everything. Inside were carefully organized documents, old photos, and a series of receipts and contracts that made Arthur's blood run cold. The first document was a financial audit report dated 3 months ago, secretly commissioned by Eleanor to investigate irregularities in the management of her investments. He murmured, "My God," as he examined the papers, realizing his mother had discovered she was being robbed. The report showed evidence of unauthorized transfers, forged documents, and a series of suspicious financial operations that had cost Eleanor over $200,000 in the last 2 years. And the person with access and authority to carry out these operations was always the same: Beatrice Vance, as Eleanor's legal attorney. Lily asked if Beatrice was stealing from Grandma, trying to understand. Arthur replied that it seemed so, his voice filled with indignation and disappointment. Beatrice wasn't just greedy. She had betrayed the trust of a sick, elderly woman to enrich herself. The next document was even more shocking. A private investigation Eleanor had commissioned into Beatrice's financial history. The lawyer was up to her neck in debt, with gambling debts and failed investments totaling over $500,000. Arthur understood that she needed the money, and when his mother discovered what was happening, Beatrice panicked. There was also a series of recordings on small digital devices, each labeled with dates from the last weeks of Eleanor's life. Arthur connected the first one to his phone and heard his mother's weak but determined voice. She said that if he was listening to this, it meant her suspicions were confirmed, that Beatrice was not who he thought she was. She had been manipulating her for years, controlling her finances and isolating her so she wouldn't notice what was happening. Eleanor's voice was heavy with sadness and disappointment. She revealed that Beatrice had forged her signature several times, transferred money to her personal accounts, and even sold some of her stocks without authorization. When she confronted her last week, Beatrice had said she was senile, and no one would believe the word of a confused old woman. Arthur felt anger rise in his chest. Beatrice hadn't just stolen money, she had humiliated and manipulated a vulnerable elderly woman. The recording continued with Eleanor saying the worst part was that she had found out about Catherine and Lily, had read some of her saved letters, and was using it as blackmail. She threatened that if she told anyone about the thefts, she would ensure his precious son never knew about his sister and orphaned niece. Lily, who had listened to the recording with impressive attention for a 4-year-old, said that's why Grandma was so nervous in the last few weeks. Arthur agreed and moved to the next recording where Eleanor explained her plan. She had decided to change her will without Beatrice knowing, hiring another lawyer in secret and leaving specific instructions about Lily and the shelter. But she knew Beatrice would try to prevent those instructions from being carried out, which was why she was leaving this evidence for him. Eleanor's voice grew weaker, clearly tired. She admitted she had made many mistakes, abandoning Catherine when she was young due to family pressure and distancing herself from him when she got older out of pride and fear. But now she had a chance to fix at least part of her mistakes. She pleaded with him to take care of Lily, saying she was the best that was left of their family. When the recording ended, Arthur and Lily were silent for a few moments. The weight of the revelations was transforming not only his understanding of Beatrice, but of the entire family dynamic of recent years. Lily pointed to other documents in the safe. Arthur found copies of Eleanor's new will, duly registered and witnessed, in which she left a substantial portion of the inheritance to Lily and another to St. Vincent's Shelter. There was also a power of attorney revoking all powers previously granted to Beatrice and an express order that her body be buried, not cremated, so that there would be adequate time for the family to process the loss and discover the truth. Arthur concluded that Beatrice was trying to cremate the body quickly because she knew the more time he had to investigate, the more evidence he would find. The last document in the safe was a personal letter from Eleanor to him. She asked her dear son to forgive an old mother for complicating his life so much. She could have told him everything in person, but was afraid he wouldn't believe her, or that Beatrice would convince him she was losing her sanity. She described Lily as a special child who deserved to know the family her mother could never have. She knew he would be a wonderful uncle to her, much better than she had been as a mother to him and Catherine. As for Beatrice, she urged him not to let her get away with it, stating the money she stole could have changed the lives of many children at the shelter. But more importantly, she made her feel like a crazy, worthless old woman in her final months of life, and that was unforgivable. Arthur folded the letter carefully, a steely determination growing inside him. Beatrice had manipulated and stolen from his mother, had tried to erase Lily's existence, and was now trying to control the narrative of Eleanor's death. Lily tugged at his shirt and said someone was coming. They heard a car stop in front of the house, followed by footsteps on the porch. Arthur quickly put all the documents from the safe into a bag and closed the hiding place again. Beatrice's voice echoed through the house, calling his name and saying she knew he was there, that his car was out front. He whispered to Lily to hide the papers, and she ran to put the bag under the bed. When they came downstairs, they found Beatrice in the living room, accompanied by two men in suits whom Arthur didn't recognize. Beatrice, with a forced smile, said she needed to talk to him about the girl's situation, introducing the gentleman as being from Child Protective Services, there to take Lily back to the shelter. Arthur asked on what authority, positioning himself protectively in front of Lily. Beatrice replied coldly with the authority of someone who understands that a child cannot be in the hands of a man who is clearly in an emotional crisis. One of the men stepped forward, saying they had a court order to return the minor to state custody and that Miss Beatrice had informed them of his erratic behavior since yesterday. Arthur questioned what erratic behavior, asking if discovering he had a niece and wanting to care for her was erratic. Beatrice listed the accusations with the coolness of an experienced lawyer, inventing conspiracy theories about his own family, obstructing normal funeral procedures, kidnapping a minor from the shelter. Lily clung to Arthur's leg, clearly terrified, pleading with her uncle not to let them take her. At that moment, Arthur understood this was not just a family dispute over inheritance, it was a battle for the future of an orphaned child and for the truth about his mother's final months. And Beatrice was using all her legal influence to ensure the truth never came to light. He stated firmly that they would not take her, that Lily was his family, and he would prove it. Beatrice asked with a cruel smile what proof he had, the fantasies of a traumatized child. Arthur looked at Lily, who gave him a look of absolute trust. In her green eyes he saw not only fear, but also the same determination he had seen in Eleanor's eyes his whole life. It was time to fight for the family his mother had tried to protect. Arthur said to wait a moment, keeping his voice calm despite the storm brewing inside him. He said that before they took Lily, they needed to see some documents that changed her legal situation. Beatrice frowned, clearly not expecting organized resistance. She scoffed, asking what documents, and told Arthur he was delusional, that no documents could change the fact that this girl was an orphan and must be in state custody. Arthur blinked discreetly at Lily and asked her to go upstairs for a minute to get those important papers Grandma left for them. Lily nodded and ran upstairs, instinctively understanding she needed to retrieve the evidence from the safe. Meanwhile, Arthur addressed the men from Child Protective Services with the authority that decades of business experience had given him. He informed them that he had discovered that day that Lily was his biological niece, the daughter of Catherine Ayers, who in turn was the daughter of his mother, Eleanor Vance. One of the men, who introduced himself as Supervisor Carmichael, seemed hesitant. He said Ms. Beatrice had informed them he was inventing kinship stories to prevent the minor from returning to the shelter. Arthur retorted, his voice filled with controlled indignation, asking if they had believed her word without investigating, and what kind of child protection that was. Beatrice stepped forward, trying to regain control. She argued that even if that crazy story were true, he was in no condition to care for a child, being single, working 12-hour days, and never having shown interest in family. Arthur looked directly at her and asked if she had, because from what he had discovered that day, her interest in the family had always been purely financial. The mask of concern on Beatrice's face slipped for an instant, revealing something colder underneath as she asked what he was talking about. At that moment, Lily came downstairs carrying the bag with the documents from the safe. Arthur took out the audit report and handed it to the men from CPS. He explained that it was an audit report commissioned by his mother 3 months ago, showing evidence that Beatrice had been embezzling money from her accounts for over 2 years. Supervisor Carmichael examined the documents with growing attention, while his colleague, who identified himself as social worker Ramos, began taking notes. Beatrice claimed they were just papers, that anyone could forge documents, and that Eleanor was senile and easily manipulated. Arthur questioned if she was senile enough to be robbed, yet lucid enough to hire an auditor, and also lucid enough to record conversations where she was being blackmailed. Beatrice visibly paled and asked what recordings. Arthur connected one of the digital devices from the safe to his phone and turned up the volume. Eleanor's weak but clear voice filled the room, confronting Beatrice about the unauthorized transfers and forged documents, accusing her of abusing her trust. Beatrice's cruel and calculating response on the recording was that no one would believe a confused old woman, and if she tried to expose her, she would make sure her precious son never knew about his illegitimate daughter and orphaned granddaughter. The silence in the room was deafening. Supervisor Carmichael stopped examining the documents and fixed his eyes on Beatrice, who was trying to maintain her composure but was visibly shaken. She tried to defend herself, claiming it was taken out of context, that Eleanor was having paranoid episodes and she was just trying to calm her down. Social worker Ramos asked, clearly disturbed, if she calmed her down by blackmailing her. Lily approached Arthur and tugged his shirt, telling her uncle to show them what Grandma said about Aunt Beatrice in the last recording. Arthur played the final recording, where Eleanor's voice was weaker, but still determined. She stated that if anything happened to her before she could expose the truth about Beatrice, she wanted it known that Beatrice had gambling debts totaling over $500,000 and had stolen from her to pay off loan sharks and online betting sites. She had the bank statements to prove it. The recording continued with devastating details about Beatrice's gambling addiction, the threats she had received from creditors, and how she had used her position as Eleanor's attorney to appropriate family funds. Arthur concluded, looking at the CPS men, that this was why she wanted to accelerate the cremation, to reduce the time he had to investigate and discover the truth. Beatrice finally lost her composure, shouting that they didn't understand, that Eleanor had plenty of money and didn't even notice when some was missing, and she was just managing her resources more efficiently. Supervisor Carmichael asked with incredulity if she was admitting to moving funds without authorization. She claimed she had power of attorney and legal authority. Arthur showed the document proving the power of attorney had been revoked 3 weeks ago, that his mother had discovered her thefts and revoked all her legal powers, leaving her with no authority at all. The realization that she had been caught in lies and crimes spread across Beatrice's face like an oil slick. She glanced at the door, as if calculating her chances of a dignified escape. Arthur continued, presenting the true will of his mother with specific instructions for him to be Lily's legal guardian and a substantial amount designated for St. Vincent's shelter. Beatrice murmured it was impossible, that she had read the will and there was no mention of any child. Arthur explained she had read the old will, that this one was made in secret precisely to prevent her from knowing and sabotaging the plans. Supervisor Carmichael gently asked Lily to tell them how she met Mrs. Eleanor. With impressive articulation for her 4 years, Lily recounted the entire story, how her mother Catherine had decided to seek reconciliation, the fatal accident, how she had found her grandmother alone, and how Eleanor had spent her final months trying to protect her and prepare Arthur to take on family responsibility. Lily concluded that her grandma always said Aunt Beatrice was a bad person pretending to be good, and that one day everyone would find out who she really was. Social worker Ramos closed his notepad, stating that based on what they had seen and heard, he believed they needed to suspend the removal order for the minor until a full investigation of the family situation was completed. Beatrice protested that they couldn't do that she had rights as a family member. Supervisor Carmichael coldly replied that she lost those rights when she decided to steal from a vulnerable elderly woman and blackmail her to hide her crimes. Just then, Arthur's phone rang. It was Theo, his voice tense with urgency. He said he needed to talk to him immediately, that he had discovered something about Beatrice's financial movements that changed everything, and that she had tried to bribe the funeral director to speed up the cremation without his authorization. Arthur said he was on his way, then addressed the CPS men, saying his accountant had more evidence of Beatrice's illegal actions and asked if they would like to accompany him. Beatrice, realizing her situation was becoming untenable, made one last desperate attempt. She pleaded with Arthur that they could resolve this within the family without involving strangers, offering to compensate for any financial misunderstanding and suggesting they could find an arrangement for the girl that worked for everyone. Arthur looked at her with a mixture of sadness and disgust. This woman had manipulated and stolen from his elderly mother, tried to erase Lily's existence, and was now offering arrangements as if it were a business dispute. He took Lily's hand and said the only arrangement he was interested in was ensuring she paid for everything she did to his family, and that Lily grew up knowing she had relatives who truly loved her. As they left Eleanor's house, Lily looked back one last time and asked if Grandma would be happy. He replied that she would be very proud of her, feeling a renewed determination. The battle was just beginning, but for the first time in days, he felt he was fighting on the right side of history. Theo's office was in chaos when Arthur arrived with Lily and the men from Child Protective Services. Papers were scattered everywhere, and Theo had an expression mixing outrage with total disbelief. He told Arthur it was worse than they imagined, that Beatrice hadn't just stolen $200,000, but the total was closer to $800,000 over the last 5 years. Supervisor Carmichael examined the numbers, asking how it was possible. Theo explained she used Eleanor's power of attorney to open accounts in her name, take out loans using properties as collateral, and even sell stocks without authorization. He showed a series of loan agreements where Beatrice had used Eleanor's house as collateral to get money from loan sharks, revealing the house had been mortgaged 3 times without his mother's knowledge. Arthur repeated 3 times. feeling the ground shift beneath him. Theo confirmed it, adding the worst part was that if the loans weren't paid in the next 2 months, the creditors could seize the property, which explained Beatrice's rush to cremate his mother and expedite the will reading. Lily, sitting in a chair too big for her, suddenly spoke up, saying her grandma told her about bad men who came to her house. Everyone turned to the girl. Social worker Ramos asked what bad men. She described men in dark suits who came when Aunt Beatrice was there, who spoke loudly and scared her grandma, and that she once heard them say they would take everything if the money didn't appear soon. Theo paled, identifying them as loan sharks and realizing Beatrice must have been under pressure from violent creditors. Lily added, with the unsettling seriousness of a child who has seen too much, that her grandma said Aunt Beatrice threatened to put her in a nursing home if she told anyone. The horror of it filled the room. Beatrice hadn't just stolen money, she had psychologically terrorized a sick old woman. Theo said there was more, handing over a sealed envelope from the funeral director, stating Beatrice had offered an extra $5,000 to rush the cremation without Arthur's authorization. Supervisor Carmichael noted this constituted attempted bribery and destruction of evidence in a contested inheritance case. Just then, Theo's phone rang. It was Dr. Caldwell, his voice audibly shaken. He needed to speak with Arthur urgently about Eleanor, saying he had discovered something terrible. Arthur took the phone. Dr. Caldwell confessed that Beatrice had pressured him to sign the death certificate without performing all the necessary procedures, claiming it was to spare the family prolonged suffering. Arthur's blood ran cold. He asked what he meant by not all procedures. The doctor explained he hadn't done the full autopsy required for sudden pneumonia in the elderly, as Beatrice had insisted it was an unnecessary traumatic formality. Arthur asked if he was suggesting his mother might not have died of natural causes. The long pause on the other end was heavy with tension. Dr. Caldwell said he was suggesting he needed to redo the tests immediately, that some inconsistencies he had noticed, but which Beatrice had convinced him to ignore, now made sense. Lily tugged on Arthur's shirt, saying her grandma had told her something very strange in her last days, that Aunt Beatrice was giving her medicine that made her very sleepy and confused, medicine the doctor hadn't prescribed. The revelation hit the room like a bomb. Dr. Caldwell, still on the phone, let out a horrified groan. He asked what medicine, if Lily remembered what her grandmother said. She described them as small, white pills that Aunt Beatrice put in her food, calling them vitamins. But after taking them, her grandma would get very confused and couldn't remember things. Dr. Caldwell told Arthur, his voice trembling, that he needed to examine his mother's body immediately. If Beatrice was giving Eleanor unprescribed medications, especially sedatives or cognitive-affecting drugs, she was trying to keep his mother confused, to continue stealing from her without resistance. The doctor added it was worse than that. If she had gradually increased the dosage, it could have caused the respiratory failure that led to the pneumonia. Supervisor Carmichael interrupted, stating this was now a matter for the police, that if there was suspicion of gradual poisoning resulting in death, it could no longer be treated as a civil dispute. Theo stood up abruptly, saying he had just received a call from the bank. Beatrice had tried to withdraw $100,000 from Eleanor's account that morning, claiming urgent funeral expenses. Arthur exclaimed she no longer had power of attorney. Theo confirmed the manager had blocked the transaction and called him because it was suspicious, but it showed her desperation. With loan sharks closing in and evidence mounting, she was trying to grab as much money as possible. Lily went to the window, a worried expression on her face, and pointed out a car that had been parked across the street for a long time, the same as the bad men's car from her grandma's house. Everyone looked. A black sedan with tinted windows was parked across the street, 2 men inside watching the building. Theo murmured it was the loan sharks, that Beatrice must have told them where he was, and if she couldn't pay, they'd go after any family member. Social worker Ramos immediately called for police protection for a minor and a family at risk. Arthur firmly said no, that they would resolve this the right way first. He told Theo to take all the documents to the county clerk's office to officially register the revocation of Beatrice's power of attorney and his temporary guardianship of Lily. As for the loan sharks, he would give them a choice: accept an organized payment plan to settle the fraudulent debts or face a criminal lawsuit for coercion and extortion. Supervisor Carmichael seemed impressed. Asking if he had experience with such situations, Arthur replied that he had 40 years of experience in tough negotiations and now had a motivation he never had before: protecting his family. Lily returned to his side, holding his hand with absolute confidence, and said her grandma told her that when this moment came, he would discover how to be truly brave. He said her grandmother was right, feeling a profound transformation. For decades, he had fought only for money and business success. Now he was fighting for something infinitely more important. Dr. Caldwell returned to the call with a grave tone, saying he had a court order to redo the post-mortem exams on Eleanor, but they needed to act fast, as Beatrice would try to rush the cremation if she found out. Social worker Ramos asked where she was now. Theo, after checking some calls, said the funeral home reported she had shown up an hour ago claiming to have family authorization for immediate cremation. Arthur said they would stop it, grabbing his car keys. He told Lily she was coming with him, that it was time to confront Beatrice with all the evidence at once. As they headed to the funeral home, Arthur knew the next moments would define not just his family's future, but whether justice would be served for the crimes against his mother. And for the first time in his life, he was fighting for something much greater than money or personal success. He was fighting for the love and memory of people who truly mattered. The Harmony Creek funeral home was wrapped in a tense silence when Arthur arrived with Lily and the entire CPS entourage. The parking lot was empty except for Beatrice's car and an unfamiliar white van. The air felt heavy, as if a storm were about to break. Lily whispered that she was there, pointing to the lit windows of the main hall and that there were other people with her. Arthur felt a knot in his stomach. Through the translucent curtains, he could see several silhouettes in a heated discussion. Beatrice was gesticulating frantically while two other men watched her with unfriendly expressions. Theo, who had arrived shortly after them, murmured it was the loan sharks, that she must have arranged to meet them there for one last gambit. Dr. Caldwell came running across the parking lot, carrying a medical file and accompanied by a court officer. He told Arthur he had the court order and they could stop the cremation and redo the exams. Supervisor Carmichael observed the suspicious movement through the windows and said they had arrived just in time, as a tense negotiation seemed to be happening inside. When they entered the funeral home, the sound of raised voices became audible. Beatrice was clearly desperate, her sharp voice cutting through the air like a razor. She was telling someone they didn't understand that by tomorrow she would have access to the funds. It was just a matter of speeding up some procedures. A rough male voice replied that she had been stringing them along for 2 months, and their boss no longer accepted promises. Either she paid today, or they would collect from the whole family. Beatrice shouted back that Arthur had nothing to do with her debts. The voice retorted that he did when the debts were incurred, using family property as collateral. Arthur took a deep breath and pushed open the door to the main hall. The scene he found made him simultaneously furious and nauseated. Beatrice was cornered between two menacing-looking men, while the funeral director, Mr. Moachir, tried to mediate nervously. Beatrice cried out Arthur's name upon seeing him, running toward him as if for salvation. She claimed the gentlemen were making baseless threats about matters unrelated to his mother's funeral. One of the loan sharks, a bald, heavy-set man with visible scars, turned to Arthur. He said his aunt here owed them $600,000 and used the old family home as collateral. Either he paid or they took everything. Arthur calmly pulled documents from his briefcase and stated that, in fact, she couldn't use family property as collateral because her power of attorney had been revoked 3 weeks ago. Beatrice paled, pleading with Arthur not to complicate things, that they could resolve it as a family. He laughed bitterly, asking if that's what she called it after she stole nearly $1 million from his mother, possibly contributed to her death with unprescribed medications, and now wanted to resolve it as a family. The second loan shark, thinner, but with eyes as cold as ice, approached Arthur. He said they weren't interested in the family feud, they just wanted their money. Arthur stated firmly that they would get it, but legally and in an organized manner. He explained that all properties Beatrice used as collateral were being reverted to his mother's estate, and a financial crimes lawyer would arrange a payment schedule. The bald man laughed with disdain, saying they didn't work with schedules, they worked with immediate results. At that point, Supervisor Carmichael stepped in, demanding the men identify themselves, stating he was a CPS employee and a minor was present, and any threat or coercion would be reported to the police immediately. The two loan sharks exchanged glances, clearly not expecting authorities. Beatrice used the confusion to attempt another manipulation. She told Arthur they were exaggerating, that it was just a few small loans to cover his mother's medical expenses, which he knew were expensive. Dr. Caldwell interrupted, saying Beatrice hadn't spent a cent on Eleanor's medical care and had, in fact, prevented her from receiving several treatments he had recommended. Beatrice denied it, but the doctor insisted he had detailed medical notes, that she had cancelled physical therapy, specialist consultations, and even medications that could have improved her quality of life. Lily let go of Arthur's hand and walked directly up to Beatrice, looking her in the eyes with a courage that impressed everyone. She said, her small voice firm, that she was mean to Grandma, that Grandma cried after she left and was afraid of her. Beatrice tried to defend herself, claiming a child couldn't understand such complex things, but her voice was shaky. Lily insisted she did understand, that Grandma had explained everything, that she stole her money and gave her bad medicine to make her confused. The bold loan shark looked at Beatrice with disgust, asking what kind of person steals from a sick old woman. Beatrice desperately protested that it wasn't like that. Arthur said it was exactly like that, showing the recordings from the secret safe, proving everything. Dr. Caldwell approached Mr. Moachir and informed him he had a court order to prevent any cremation procedure until further notice due to suspicion of irregularities in the cause of death. Mr. Moachir seemed relieved, saying Mrs. Beatrice had been pressuring to speed everything up, even without full family authorization. The court officer with Dr. Caldwell asked if she had offered a bribe to accelerate the process. Mr. Moachir confirmed she had offered an extra $5,000 to resolve it quickly without bureaucracy. Beatrice realized her situation was untenable. The loan sharks looked at her with growing contempt. Her family had discovered her crimes, and the authorities were present. In desperation, she made one last attempt to turn the situation around. She shouted that she admitted to some financial mistakes, but that even after returning everything, there was enough money in the inheritance to pay off the debts and care for the girl. Arthur asked with disbelief if she was calling theft a loan. Beatrice continued ignoring him, saying the girl didn't have to stay with him, that she could go to a suitable adoptive family, and the resources allocated to her in the will could be used to resolve the financial issues. The ensuing silence was glacial. Lily hid behind Arthur, clearly frightened by the suggestion of being separated from him. Supervisor Carmichael said slowly, asking if she was suggesting they give a child up for adoption to use her inheritance to pay her gambling debts. She claimed it was a practical solution, that the girl would be well cared for and all problems would be solved. The thin loan shark shook his head in disgust, saying he worked with all kinds of debtors, but she was the first to suggest selling a child to pay them back. She retorted that she hadn't said sell, but intelligently reallocate resources. Arthur felt such intense anger he had to control himself not to explode. He told Beatrice she had completely lost her sense of right and wrong, that Lily was not a resource to be reallocated. She was his niece and would stay with him. Beatrice argued he didn't even know how to care for a child, that he lived for his work. He said simply that he would learn and he would do better than her, who only knew how to care about stealing money. Dr. Caldwell interrupted the argument, saying he needed to proceed with the medical exams and that if his suspicions were confirmed, Beatrice would face much more serious charges than financial fraud. The realization of what the doctor was suggesting hit Beatrice like a bucket of cold water. If it was proven that her unprescribed medications contributed to Eleanor's death, she could be charged with manslaughter or even murder. She murmured that it was ridiculous, that Eleanor was sick and old and these things happen, but her voice had lost all its strength. Doctor, Caldwell said firmly that they would find out. As the doctor went to perform the necessary procedures, Arthur knelt beside Lily. He asked if she was okay, knowing it was all very confusing and scary. She said she was fine, that her grandma had told her this would happen one day, and that afterward everything would get better. He hugged her and said her grandmother was right, that things would get much better from now on. But as he watched Beatrice being questioned by the loan sharks and the authorities, Arthur knew the hardest part was yet to come. The medical exams would reveal the truth about Eleanor's death, and depending on the results, his sister-in-law could face consequences far more serious than just returning stolen money. 3 days had passed since the confrontation at the funeral home, and the tension in Arthur's house was palpable. Lily had temporarily moved in while the legal procedures were finalized, completely transforming the routine of a man accustomed to silence and solitude. The guest room was quickly adapted with children's furniture, toys, and vibrant colors that contrasted with the sober decor of the rest of the house. On a sunny Thursday morning, Lily, who had decided to call him Daddy Arthur after the official adoption process began, asked if they could visit Grandma Eleanor's grave, as it was the anniversary of her passing. The date had not gone unnoticed by Arthur. A whole year since his life had completely changed because of a grubby little girl's screams at his mother's wake. He agreed, saying they would bring fresh flowers. She asked if they would tell her about the new shelter, and he confirmed they would. St. Vincent's shelter had been completely renovated with part of Eleanor's inheritance, becoming the best-equipped child welfare center in the region. Martha now ran a modern institution with psychologists, specialized teachers, and facilities that provided dignity and hope for vulnerable children. When they arrived at the cemetery, Lily ran ahead to Eleanor's grave, already decorated with fresh flowers someone had left. She called out, intrigued, that someone had already brought flowers. Arthur approached and found a small card among the blooms. To Eleanor, who taught me it's never too late to ask for forgiveness. With love and eternal gratitude, Doris. Arthur murmured that Doris still came, touched by the former housekeeper's loyalty. Lily asked who Doris was, and he explained she was a person who had cared for her grandma for many years and had made some mistakes, but was now trying to fix things. Lily arranged their flowers next to the others, creating a small, colorful garden on the headstone. She spoke naturally to the tombstone, telling Grandma Eleanor she had good news, that Daddy Arthur was very happy now, laughed a lot, and taught her new things every day. Arthur felt his eyes well up as he watched his daughter. He could officially think of her that way now, share her joys with the grandmother who had orchestrated it all. She continued, asking if her grandma knew about the special thing she had left for them. He asked what it was, curious. She told him to tell her about the safe at her mummy's house. Arthur smiled. The previous week, while finishing organizing Catherine's house before selling it, they had found a small safe hidden in the attic. Inside, Eleanor had left one last surprise, a final letter and documents that revealed the most extraordinary discovery of their entire journey. He addressed the headstone, saying his mother had truly thought of everything. The letter in the safe, written by Eleanor just days before her death, when she already knew Beatrice was trying to poison her gradually, read, "My dear Arthur and Lily, if you are reading this, it means you have overcome all the obstacles I placed in your path to discover what truly matters in life. Arthur, you were always a good son, but you were lost in work and loneliness. You needed to learn to truly love and be loved. Lily was the key to that. Lily, my dear granddaughter, you brought light back to our family. But there is something you still don't know about your story. Catherine was not just my biological daughter. When I secretly reconnected with her 2 years ago, I discovered she had become a pediatrician and dedicated her life to caring for orphaned children. Exactly as I had always dreamed of doing, but never had the courage. She was working in an adoption program in Savannah when she died, and she left not just you, Lily, but also a will that allocates all her resources to create an educational fund for underprivileged children. Along with the inheritance I left, you now have enough resources not only to live comfortably, but to transform the lives of hundreds of children for years to come." Arthur had been shocked to discover that Catherine had followed in her mother's footsteps in social welfare, and that her own inheritance was meant to amplify their positive impact on the community. Lily continued speaking to the headstone, adding that her daddy had decided they would use the money to open a special school for children without families, just like she used to be. A voice behind them asked about a school. They turned to see Doris approaching, carrying more flowers, her eyes red from crying. The former housekeeper had lost weight and seemed visibly older, carrying the weight of guilt for the months she had been a silent accomplice to Beatrice's abuse. Lily exclaimed Doris's name and ran to hug the woman she had met at Eleanor's house. Doris, emotional, said how much she had grown and how beautiful and healthy she looked. Arthur approached cautiously, as they hadn't spoken since the funeral when she confessed her passive complicity. She said she came every week to ask for Eleanor's forgiveness, knowing she couldn't undo her mistakes. Arthur told her she was scared and that Beatrice had manipulated her too. She replied that it was no excuse, that she should have protected her and told him what was happening. Lily pulled Doris's hand and said her grandma had told her she was a good person who got scared, and that good people sometimes do wrong things when they're scared, but then they try to fix them. The simplicity and forgiveness in the girl's voice made Doris begin to weep openly. Arthur suggested she help them with the new school, saying Eleanor always said she understood children and knew how to care for them well. Doris's eyes widened in surprise, asking if he would forgive her and give her a chance. He replied that Eleanor believed in forgiveness and second chances, and he thought that's what she would want them to do. Lily asked if that meant she would work with them, already instinctively creating family ties with another person. Doris said if they would let her, it would be the greatest honor of her life. At that moment, standing in the cemetery between the two most important women in his new life, Arthur understood the true legacy Eleanor had left. It wasn't just about discovering family secrets or inheriting money. It was about learning to forgive, to love unconditionally, and to use one's resources to improve the lives of others. He addressed the grave, promising they would take care of each other and all the children who needed them, thanking her for teaching him what truly matters in life. Lily added her thanks for giving her a real family, and Doris whispered her thanks for giving her a chance to fix her mistakes. When they left the cemetery in that golden late afternoon, the three of them walked hand in hand toward the car. Lily was in the middle, swinging happily between the two adults who now formed her chosen family. As they got in the car, she asked if her grandma was happy with them. Arthur looked in the rear-view mirror toward Eleanor's grave, where the colorful flowers created a small garden of memories and love. He said he was sure she was, my dear. He was sure she was very happy. 6 months later, the Eleanor Vance School for Vulnerable Children opened its doors in Harmony Creek, offering free, quality education, psychological support, and a family environment for dozens of orphaned or abandoned children. Lily, now 5, attended regular school in the morning and spent her afternoons helping Doris care for the younger children at the special school. Arthur had discovered that his true calling was not just making money, but investing in people's development. And in every child who found a temporary or permanent family through the school's work, he saw a reflection of the journey his own family had taken, from pain and abandonment to love and hope. The story that had begun with the desperate screams of a grubby girl at a wake had transformed into the joyous symphony of dozens of children playing in a place where they were loved, protected, and prepared for a better future. Eleanor had finally managed to create the family she had always dreamed of. A family that extended far beyond blood ties and embraced any child in need of love and protection. And her legacy would continue to grow through every transformed life, every recovered smile, and every new home built on the foundation of true love. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment what you thought of my story, giving it a score from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.